Okay, kids, on this video we are going to talk about ratios and graphs, okay? Now, sometimes it's nice to see how things connect as we're learning about them. How does graphing ratios fit into what we've learned so far? Well, if you look back, we've learned about ordered pairs, okay? And what ordered pairs are, okay? So we learned about those. Then we took ordered pairs and we learned about graphing our ordered pairs on the coordinate plane with the x and the y axis, okay? And so we learned about that. So we learned about those and how you graph. Then we went on to another unit and we learned about ratios, okay? And what a ratio is and how we write ratios, such as circles to squares, 3 to 2, okay? So we learned how to write ratios. Then we learned how to create equivalent ratios, and we learned that we can do that through multiplication or division. And we talked about proportions and proportional and equivalent amounts. Then what we did was we moved from there, we talked about ratio tables and creating ratio tables based on an initial ratio, such as 3 to 2, and how you could use multiplication or division to change the value so that it was proportional and still giving you the same relationship between the two numbers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about graphing ratios. Now graphing ratios, then you can see where what we've learned about ratios is now going to apply to what we learned about ordered pairs. Okay, so it makes for all one big learning situation. Okay? So you have the skills to do what we're going to talk about today. Ratios and graphs. There are 5 basic steps for graphing ratios. Very simply, now these steps will look a little bit like what I just talked about. Your first step is to find or determine your base ratio, the ratio you want to start working with. Your second step is to make a ratio table with equivalent ratios. The third step is to write the ratios as ordered pairs. Once you have them as ordered pairs, you plot or graph the ordered pairs. And then you draw your line. Okay? So, again, we know about ratios, and we determine a base ratio if we're going to graph them. Then we create equivalent ratios, and then we use these ratios as ordered pairs, and then we take and we graph our ordered pairs, and once we've got them graphed, we make a line. Okay? So that's how you graph ratios. So I'm going to give you an example right now, which is pretty basic. And the situation is a store sells 3 candy bars for $2. Okay? So we get 3 candy bars for $2. The question is, how much would it cost for 12 candy bars? Now, we know from our experience that the first thing we want to do if we want to find out the cost of 12 candy bars, we can do it mathematically by setting up an initial ratio of 3 to 2. And then doing this mathematically to form a proportion. So we have our candy bars and we have our money. And we could, of course, say, well, here is our target ratio or our target term, the term we want to reach. So if we want to go from 3 to 12, we would multiply by 4 and multiply the 2 by 4 as well. Okay? So we would get 12 to 8. In other words, the cost for 12 candy bars would be $8. All right? But, you know, that's nice to know. But sometimes we like to see this on a graph. And we'd like to see how the price changes with different amounts of candy. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually graph this situation. We're going to graph this situation so we can find out how much it'll cost for 12 candy bars. And we kind of already know. But remember, here's what we want to do first. The first thing that we want to do is set up our base ratio of 3 to 2. We are then going to take and make a table. Okay, so we want a nice ratio table here. All right, and we're going to label the rows. We're going to label the rows candy and money. Okay, now we have our starting ratio, which is 3 to 2, and we want to get to 12. Okay, so we could multiply by 1, multiply by 2, and so 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 2 is 4, so we're making our ratio table. We're not at 12 yet, so we want to, 12 is our target. So now we're going to go to our third column. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 2 is 6. So now we have an equivalent ratio of 9 to 6. And now we're going to multiply by 4 because it is our fourth column. And of course we do 4 times 3 is 12. And that gives us what we want, 12 candy bars. And then we're going to multiply 4 times 2, which is 8. And then that tells us that it will cost $8 for the candy bars, which we've already proven mathematically. Okay? But now what we want to do is we want to graph these points. All right? So if we want to graph each of these equivalent ratios, we're going to write them as ordered pairs. So our first one will be 3 to 2. So we're going to create an x value of 3 and a y value of 2. All right? So remember, importantly, this top row is the x and this bottom row is the y number because it's an x to y relationship. X to y relationship. All right? So we then write our next coordinate. Okay? So this is a 3, 2. This one would be 6, 4. This one would be 9, 6. And this one would be 12, 8. Okay? So now we have our coordinates to graph. And if we graph them, we'll start with this set of ordered pairs. So we're going to come over, and we go over 3. And now there is no 3 on there, but it is between the 2 and the 4. So we go over 3 and up, whoops, too far up to 2. Over 3 and up to 2. All right? So then our next one is 6, 4. So we come over to 6, over to 6, and up to 4. Okay? And remember, you don't need to draw those lines. You can just plot the points. Then our next ordered pair, based on the equivalent ratios, would be 9, 6. So 9 is in the middle of 8 and 10, and we go up to 6. Then we have our last ordered pair of 12, 8. So we come over to 12, and we go up to 8. And at this point, you can see that we definitely have a linear pattern there. Okay? And so we have just graphed our ratio. okay, and we have answered the question, what would the cost be for 12 candy bars? Well, this is our candy, and this is our cost. So then, if we come over here to 12, and we go up to where it hits the line, we can then look over and say, oh, the cost is $8. All right? And that's how you would graph ratios. All right? So if you have any questions, you can see your teacher or you can watch some of the other videos posted.